Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give it a few seconds while I know it takes a few moments for participants to come into the room. I hope everyone's managing to stay at least somewhat comfortable and cool. Not necessarily the best weather to be sitting watching a webinar, so really appreciate everyone joining us today. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon. And welcome. Thank you, everyone. So this is our brand new and exciting series of events specifically for charities and non-profits. Today, we're going to be focusing on effective strategic planning for organisations of all shapes and sizes across the charitable and non-profit sector. My name's Katy Baker and I'm Director of Services at Oaks Consultancy. At Oaks, we work across a range of socially minded sectors, supporting organisations with things like fundraising strategy, income generation, and unsurprisingly, strategic planning. So I'm joined today by an incredibly talented and experienced panel of charity leaders who I hope are going to let me pick their brains about their experiences, views, and approaches to strategic planning for charities. And in a moment, I'll ask them to introduce themselves. But before we do that, I just want to again welcome everybody in the audience and thank you for coming along on such an uncomfortable and hot day. But we'd love, if possible, for you to engage in our discussion through submitting some of your own questions in the chat box, and one of my Oaks team will hopefully feed them through to me and we can try and weave some of those in as we go through. So with no further ado, I would love for our esteemed panel to spend perhaps 30 seconds or a minute or so just telling us a little bit about them, their kind of role, professional experience, and their personal experience of strategic planning. And I'm going to start with Hayley as she's first on my screen. So over to you, Hayley.
Thank you very much, Katy. Hi, everybody. I apologise if I look like I'm glistening. I am. It's so hot. Anyway, so I'm Hayley Roffey. I'm the Managing Director at Global Fund for Children. Global Fund for Children, for those of you who don't know, is a beautiful blend of both a funder and a service delivery organisation. And we work with over 200 partners right now across the world, but we've been in existence for nearly 30 years and we've worked with over 900 partners, and we call our grantees partners because we feel incredibly lucky to be working alongside them to help them achieve their missions to better the lives of communities all over the world. We're very much a locally rooted organisation. We only work with partners who are locally led in their local communities, and that's been our way of working for 30 years. In terms of my personal experience in strategy, I have almost 2 decades of experience in developing strategies with a variety of charities, mainly here in the UK. I sit on a couple of boards, so I've also had the experience of leading strategy with leadership within an organisation at that level. And then we've actually just finished our 5-year strategy planning process at GFC. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the experiences we've had hot off the press.
Brilliant, so really timely. Thank you very much, Hayley. Rita, could I ask you to do the same, please?
Thank you, Katy, and good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so my background is now, I've worked for 33 different organisations, which sounds like I'm really bad at my job, but I'm not. Well, I don't think I am anyway, that's for others to judge. But I specialise in organisations that are in crisis and working on interim projects as well. So often when I go into an organisation, they're facing a number of situations. And if there's anybody on the call who's struggling with their own organisation, you're not alone. There is no situation that another small charity hasn't faced. So no matter how bad you think you are, I can guarantee you there's somebody out there who's faced a similar situation. In terms of strategic planning, I'm also a trustee of several organisations. So I see it from both sides. As a staff member trying to organise a strategy away day, trying to get everybody on the same page around a strategy and actually defining what is a strategy and what's a business plan is really, really difficult. I think that's one of the key challenges for everyone. And on the other hand, as a trustee, trying to understand the strategy of an organisation where actually the staff team may be working at such pace that they're operationally so effective that sometimes you can feel a bit divorced from what's going on the ground as well. So I see it from both ends, and hopefully I'll bring some of those perspectives in during this conversation.
I'm sure you will. Thank you very much, Rita. And Rohati is actually joining us on her holiday this week. So special thanks to Rohati, who's calling in from a holiday cottage, not that we're all jealous, somewhere in the southwest of England. So Rohati.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Devon. My name's Rohati Chapman. I am Executive Director of Programmes and Impact at an organisation called the Carers Trust, which is the largest infrastructure body for local carer organisations who are essentially, deliverers of social care. Before Carers Trust, I have worked for over 20 years bringing social change missions to life from mainly the charity sector and charities large and small, but I've also worked for local government and also in the private sector. So a really diverse panoramic view of charity sector strategic planning. My experience and insights that I'd like to bring today, actually mainly from the recent strategic review process that we've been undertaking at Carers Trust, but also bringing kind of wider experiences I've got from other network organisations that I've worked for. And also I'm the chair of a social enterprise called Renacy, and they're also in the middle of doing a strategic review. So hopefully good conversations and insights to share and trade with the panel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rohati. A kind of real wealth of experience there, both from kind of within organisations and as trustees. So really excited to hear a little bit more. I think we should start probably with, I think maybe the biggest question of all. Why should charities have a strategy? Why is it important? Rita, would you maybe like to kind of start with that, given the kind of vast array of organisations that you have worked with and for? It'd be good to hear what you've got to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a strategy is possibly one of the most pivotal documents that you can have inside an organisation. And it doesn't need to be a long, well, in my opinion, it doesn't need to be a long, expansive document that's produced by very expensive consultants or you've got on a pro bono basis. It's actually something that comes from the heart. It can be a sheet of A4. And I think the purpose around a strategy is that it gives you a sense of direction, a collective sense of direction. And without that, it's very difficult to decide where your organisation goes. And I'll give you a good parallel. There's been lots in the news this morning about engineering standards and the weather and whether our trains in the UK are built for -10 to 35 degrees, not what we've got at the moment.
Yeah.
Now, you can imagine for Network Rail to move over to a new kind of process of catering for higher temperatures, they're going to need a pathway, they're going to need a sense of direction. And I think that's where a strategy comes across really well, because it's about giving you the rationale, but also the sense of direction as well.
Fantastic. Hayley, what about you? Why is strategy so important? Why are we even here today? Why is it something we're talking about?
I just love what Rita said there about that collective sense of direction. I couldn't agree more. I think for me, it's just like strategy, like with any organization, is like the guiding star for people within an organization, so everyone collectively can see where you're headed. And I think it's critical for leadership because your best asset are your people. But if your people don't know where they're going or what they're striving for, especially in the charity sector, the day-to-day can feel really hard. We're always fighting fires. We've got to adhere to safeguarding regulations. We've got to adhere to charity commission regulations. We've got to look after a burnt out workforce who are still recovering from the pandemic. And I think your strategy can become this document full of dreams that are collectively agreed and remains your aspirational tool. And I certainly know for me, it's kept me in organisations when the day-to-day feels really tough, because I know where we're headed. I know the dreams that we've all dreamt together. are sitting in that document. And I totally agree with Rita as well. The shorter the better, the clearer the better, especially for an organisation like mine that's global. You're working across huge cultural shifts around the whole organisation, including the people that we work with in our funding relationships. And I just think it's also really important for your stakeholders to know where you're headed. You know, for when you're speaking to donors, to new grantees, we call them partners, but for those, for grantees, you know, they want to be funded by an organisation where they share strategic insight and dreams, and we're headed in this way. This is how we're going to achieve that overarching mission. And yeah, so I just think it's absolutely critical. And to echo what Rita was saying as well, the mechanism to bring in a strategy together can be completely different and can change, and it can be different year on year as well. Like a few years ago, we were in a place where we did use a consultant. This time we've done it ourselves, and next time, who knows? You know, it's not always necessarily set in stone. It's what meets your need and your purpose as an organisation in that exact moment.
Yeah, fantastic. And Rohati, same question to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question to ask, because obviously, whilst all of us on the panel are very much for effective strategic planning, many charities actually operate okay without one, particularly small charities. What I would say from my experience is, obviously, if you've got good leadership team there, if you've got funders, you will probably get by. However, it makes you vulnerable. It makes you vulnerable to different divergent views and interests. We've all worked in organizations where different members of the board and the exec team have had different you know, horizons for where the charity could go. Not having a strategy makes you vulnerable to that, makes you vulnerable to not having coherence and not having that mental map. I think also I've seen time and time again, it can make charities vulnerable to chasing funders' agenda, thinking about the next pot of funding, continuing a project, because it's about getting income in rather than whether it's actually meeting kind of the need and purpose of that charity. The other thing I'd say is that having a strategy also creates a sense of discipline around how you allocate time and resources. So, you know, being part of the exec team at Charities Trust and also on the board at Renaissance, you have to make trade-offs between, you know, opportunities. You have to understand the opportunity cost. You can't do everything, can't afford to do everything. So without a strategy, you're really vulnerable to all of that. So if you're an organization that's got long-term ambition, really think about developing one.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rohati. I just wanted to, before we move on to the next question, I think that we're having some issues with the chat function. So if you do have a question, and I think you can direct it into the Q&A part, and we'll try and figure something out. So please do still send your questions across. Must be the heat kind of generating some Zoom gremlins today. So apologies about that. Thank you, everyone. And I think some really kind of pertinent points there. I guess, and I think, Hayley, you kind of referenced, I guess, the last couple of years, and it's the elephant in the room that we probably can't ignore. Things have changed. How do you think the last few years has impacted the approach, perhaps, to strategic planning for charities? Hayley, could I come back to you as you kind of referenced the pandemic?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think what's really important that the pandemic has shown us is that whilst you can have a great strategy, a great plan, something can be thrown at you and you completely have to pivot. We all saw it. Our sector stood. I was so proud to be part of this sector more than ever. In my entire career has been in the charity sector, but civil society over the world kept people alive, fed, watered, employed throughout the pandemic. You know, in place of government, in place of local systems that just couldn't meet the needs. And as a result, so many charities had to completely change what they do. They had to change the communities they served. We saw our organisations coming to us saying, we need emergency funding. No one is telling people in our local community how to wash their hands properly. There's one very basic example. Some of our partners were making their own hand sanitizer. That's not, you know, empowering youth, which is one of our, you know, one of our areas of work, that is genuinely meeting a need to help keep local people alive during a pandemic, helping them be able to work safely. So I think one thing that the pandemic showed all of us actually is how nimble and flexible our strategies have to be, and how as an organisation we can be really, you know, wedded to them. Really, we love them, we want to work toward them collectively. However, we all know the moment when actually, nah, we can't do this right now, or how important it is to write into your strategy that we will be flexible and nimble when the external environment needs us to be. I think the other thing for us as well is we saw a lot of charities starting to think about succession planning in a different way. I've experienced that firsthand. Where my CEO of my previous organisation got very sick and passed away very suddenly, and we had never thought of it. So it's something that I guess is always on my mind anyway, but that's like the extreme example. You've also got people who are burned out and they're leaving the sector because it's just too hard, and we can all understand why. But if you've got a great strategy around it, even if it is on one piece of paper, you know, it doesn't have to be this all singing, all dancing document, which often those ones are the ones that stay on the shelf. That nimble, flexible plan could help with succession planning. It could be something that you are able to hand over to someone else in your organisation should that time come, and we can help protect one another from burnout and really take care of one another's well-being. Finally, I would say we actually had to completely change the way we do our strategy. It was a year late. We were supposed to do it in 2020. Funnily enough, didn't happen. And we were all totally fine with that, right? We were working in a different time with different focus areas. So we shelved it. It was a collective organisational decision, and it had to go lower on the priority list, and then to bring it back in once we found that we had the space and capacity to give it the love and attention that actually we as an organisation really wanted to give it.
Brilliant, thank you, Hayley. Yeah, I think that flexibility definitely comes through, and I think it's interesting there, you know, about the process as well and how it changed that. Rita, in kind of your experience, did you see any kind of new and innovative approaches to tackling strategic planning because of the pandemic and, you know, the kind of remoteness and virtual kind of ways that we were working?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about the pandemic for civil society was the way trustees got more involved. And I think for many trustees, it was possibly the first time they fully understood the nuances of the organisations they were supporting. And that's not to say they were doing a bad job before. It was just a different type of job that they'd stepped into during the pandemic. I think when we first went into the pandemic, I was working for a very large national infrastructure body as CEO, and I'd been there about 6 months, and we were due to launch our strategy on the 23rd of March, the day that lockdown happened. And obviously we had to shelve that. So it was meant to be a big high profile launch. We'd shelved that. And actually, if you look at the strategy that we developed 18 months after, it was totally influenced by what we had done during the pandemic. So as an organisation, we completely repivoted to a different way of working, of a different communication style, of a different form of engagement. And we used that learning to inform our strategy going forward. The challenge for us was that we were a representative body for lots of smaller charities. And I think for smaller charities in particular, it's finding the space and it's finding the time that's really difficult. So, and also I think where you've got IT challenges as well, and where you've got kind of great platforms, the whiteboards on Zoom or Google Notes, things like that, it's about everybody feeling confident. So there's been some really good training days all done on Zoom, or kind of strategy away days done all on Zoom, but people have been exhausted at the end of it. I sometimes wonder whether we pushed people into those positions because we felt we needed a strategy because the funders asked for it, or somebody's put some pressure on us, or we've internally put that pressure on ourselves because we know our old strategy has expired, and whether that's really been the right thing to do. So I think there's been moments where we've had new players come into organisations like the trustees who've been much more engaged in a different way around the strategy. We've had funders, sometimes I think overreaching, and sometimes with too much influence around how an organisation shapes its strategy. And then we've also had the external environment, people feeling their need to have, as Hayley said earlier, that sense of collective direction as well. So some really good examples there of working online, of working with different stakeholders, but still some challenges for lots of groups.
Yes, absolutely. Rohati, I mean, we've worked with you on your strategy, and we know that you started that right in the middle of, kind of pandemic and lockdown measures. So how do you think that process, kind of was adapted or evolved for you, given those kind of factors that you had to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one key change, I think, in terms of charities approaching strategy development after pandemic is that, we got, some parts of the charity sector become much more accustomed to online working. Some already were doing that already. And I think what happened at Carers Trust is before we started developing our 2022-25 strategy, which commenced in September last year, we actually had a year where we were like we were like off strategy, and that was also, though it was a deliberate choice there by the board not to use that time to go into strategic development, because like many charities, Carers Trust was focused on supporting direct beneficiaries, implementing COVID emergency funds, distributing PPE, and also, I think Hayley referred to the comment around managing kind of workforce. There was staff at risk of burnout, if not burning out from just the sheer stress of what's happening in people's personal lives as well. So I think as kind of organizations started kind of nosing out of kind of peak COVID, as I call it, I don't even know if that's appropriate, sorry. But obviously mine started turning to setting new strategies, and online was the most obvious change there was. And I'd say the positive side of that is that it actually enabled participation, probably greatly more than in person, just for really obvious reasons, such as managing the logistics. People didn't have to travel for Carers Trusts, working with people who are carers. That is very hugely convenient. But I'd say the flip side is that I sense, like many of you, that a large proportion of the working population had Zoom fatigue, and actually, if people aren't engaged in the first place, don't expect ease of access to online consultations to be a silver bullet. So, you're always at risk of online engagement reinforcing the voices of the usual suspects. And if you're looking at ways to make sure that you're managing that intentionally, it's around making sure that all of your consultation points are as representative as possible. So I'd say it's made it in some way easier, but it wasn't a total clear winner. There's nuances to that, but you were able to kind of execute the consultation phase probably faster than normal, I would say, from my experience.
Thank you. And picking up there, that clearly important to all of the strategic planning that the three of you have gone through is the engagement of those stakeholders, that consultation with partners, individuals, employees, whoever it is, being crucial to your planning process. That presents a real challenge for lots of organizations. Rita, in your experience, have you got any kind of lessons, any things that have worked, any things that haven't worked in terms of stakeholder consultation, in that strategic planning process?
Well, I think one of the things when you engage in stakeholder competition is to actually, consultation, is to actually look at what the complete horizon is. So what else is going to be placed in front of your audience that they're going to be asked to engage with? It kind of link that kind of refer to it. It's that whole consultation fatigue that people can very quickly get jaded by, here's another survey monkey that we've got to complete. And I think coupled with that as well, use your existing systems. You will have great data just by the anecdotal feedback that you get from your frontline services. Sometimes I don't think we make enough of that as data. And it's hard to quantify it, but you can use word semantics, you can use different cloud platforms to try and get that picture of what your beneficiaries are saying. So I think there's a real kind of, when you're thinking about stakeholder engagement, it's about being very clear who your audience is and why you're engaging with them. I would always say, and sorry to any funders on the call, but keep funders at arm's length, because funders, there are some very good funders out there, but there's some really bad funders who think they're helping, but they're actually overreaching, especially when they provide you with that extra funder plus kind of model. It can be a hindrance. So be clear in your own mind. What is it that you want to get out of this? Who is the audience for the strategy? And who's going to, if somebody comes in off the street, going back to Hayley's point about succession planning, will they be able to understand it? Will they be able to understand who you've spoken to and why? And I think that's a real test of a strategy.
And same to you, Hayley. You know, obviously you've got lots of partners that you kind of work with through the Fund for Children. So you kind of, how, you know, have you got anything to add to that? Anything that you've done differently that has really kind of helped engage those partners and feed into the process?
Yeah, definitely. It's quite interesting being able to speak about it from both perspectives, really, because Global Fund for Children, we raise all of our income. So we don't have an endowment or, you know, sit on any expected income at ever. So we're in that quite rare, unique position where we raise everything and we give, you know, we give grants too. And I think so we work with a lot of funders as our who are funding GFC's work, and then we also work with grantees. And I think what's really important, if you are going to Rita's point, if you are thinking about engaging funders, is that you're not reactive, that you know why you want to talk to them and for what purpose. And before you go anywhere near external funders, you're prioritizing engagement with your staff. For us, our priority was engaging with staff and then our grantees, and then the board. And I think what's really important for GFC's model is we have a trust-based relationship with our own partners. So we hope and expect the same from those funding us. And because we have really open trust-based relationships, our strategy shouldn't be a surprise anyway, because they're funding the overall model and mission of who GFC is as it's at its heart. And of course, the strategy doesn't really ever differ too much from that. It just changes our course of direction depending on external factors, the people in the heart of the organization right now. And I think what's really important, if you do engage and spend time, as Rita was saying, extracting information from people who you know, that you give it back. So, for example, we speak very vocally in our overall vision document for our new strategy. We know we need, so for example, there was this big question for GFC last year, do we want to grow? And of course, if you ask the board, it's yes. If you ask the staff, it's we can't do anymore. But if you ask the partners who we give the money to, it's yes, we need you. We need you to grow, and we need you also to get more long-term funding. We need more of your expertise. We need staff in your organization who can spend more time with us. So actually, it's the richest pool of data to drive the heart of GFC and who we are, because one of our values is serve our partners first. And I think when you combine like your values, your culture, and put that at the heart of your strategic planning process, you will know who you need to keep at arm's length. You will know who you need to pull in at the right time. For example, our board are wonderful, and we were able to say to them, who wants to be more involved in the strategic development of GFC? So we had a small group from the board who could give the time, who wanted to do it, who then it meant that group was far more in tune with what was happening, and then they could feed it back to the board at a peer level. Which was great. And then we pulled in the exec team from the board as and when needed. So it's about knowing the touch points, the pinpoints, timing it right, to know one group is holding up the process. And just knowing, I think that wisdom, you'll know as people in your organizations who is key to driving your strategy and who is okay to look at it maybe at the end, to be the last person to feedback in. And we took the same approach with our peers. You know, we've got lots of peers in the space whose opinion is really important to us. We're all navigating the same ecosystem and the same environmental sort of external issues, and actually doing a bit of a gut check with them. Are we on the right lines here? Like, what are you seeing? Anything alarming in this? Was also really, really helpful. And again, it's knowing those that you trust, you have good relationships with, who are able to be honest with you as well, because it's no good just sharing it with people who you know are just going to go, yeah, it's brilliant, well done, let's give your ego a boost. You know, it's actually people who you know you can have those open conversations with. And again, that would be potentially where a consultant or someone you know well could come into the process, maybe not lead the whole thing, but maybe coming at particular touch points to help keep you focused on the things that you know really matter.
Thank you, Hayley. So yeah, so you don't want that consultation to be tokenistic. It needs to be meaningful. And like you said, that should be fairly easy to identify. Now, Rohati, obviously you've got quite a complex kind of group of stakeholders as a membership organisation supporting lots of smaller charities. So I'm interested to hear, yes, kind of how you've approached that and what worked. But I guess also flipping it on its head. So, what role do you have as Carers Trust in supporting some of the organisations who are members of Carers Trust, who are part of that network? So kind of from both angles, if we could.
Yeah, sure. So I think key to that, because our stakeholder situation at Carers Trust is quite complex. I think what was really key right up front, I think before we even commissioned Oaks, who supported us with the strategic development process, was we actually mapped out who our key stakeholders were and how and when we needed to engage with them. So that was very upfront. Obviously, we flex that along the way, because like all strategic planning processes, you do have to kind of evolve and adapt. But I think it is having that clarity. And I think what's also interesting, Rita's point around having a look at existing information, because you don't want to exhaust people. I mean, if you can find trends information from programmatic data or other, publicly available data, use it from there. Use that kind of face-to-face or online face to online face for asking the questions that are really additive to kind of, what you need to know. And I would say in terms of how we help Carers Trust, our kind of our network partners, so they are local charities who are independent. They're not legally connected to Carers Trust at all. They work in partnership with us through a partnership agreement. There is absolutely no obligation for them to have any kind of connection to our strategy, but of course many do. And throughout the kind of town halls, which are the mechanisms that we use to kind of engage with network partners, we did have a number saying, oh, how can we tie our strategy development to yours? So this is an ongoing conversation that is happening now that Carers Trust has got its strategic priorities for the next 3 years. We are communicating that to our network partners, and there is a real opportunity there to sync things up. So we're already looking at how we can have a better collective social impact model through an impact framework. So we collect the same type of data. There is potential for us to not only be aligned on strategic priorities, but also to make sure that we are collecting the same sorts of data. We are in many ways already doing that. So I think, to summarize, Katie, we are our network partners under no obligation to set their charity to ours. When they do it voluntarily, which is obviously fantastic. But actually, the organisations in our network who did set new strategies during the pandemic or shortly afterwards, you didn't have to look too far to see the kind of the coherence between theirs and ours, which was a really good sign, and actually a kind of an indicator that we're all on the right track. But yeah, stakeholder consultation in strategic development is, I think, possibly the trickiest part of strategy development. I know many smart people who would probably prefer to just sit in a room and write the strategy themselves and go out and get it validated. Many people do that, but I think if you're a network organisation like Carers Trust, that engagement and buy-in is absolutely core to the credibility of a strategy. So you just can't afford to miss that stage out.
And Rohati, are there any kind of specific, this is a question from the audience, by the way, so kind of any specific tools or approaches that you have used either in this process or in others to help that engagement with stakeholders? So kind of the practical things that organisations could take away today. Okay,
practical things. And so I think there's obviously kind of focus groups where you get a group of people, making sure that they are representative. You can do it by kind of a geographic region, or you can do it by kind of particular, beneficiary characteristics, depending on kind of what's important to you. There's also one-to-one interviews when you want to dive deeper. Once you've kind of got the key themes arising, you might want to check that further. We also at Carers Trust, we had a session at our annual conference in 2021 where we actually deep dived on a theme that came up from the town halls to get more engagement from network partners around that, just to test that. Also, there's the usual survey, but as Rita said, Survey Monkey for strategic planning I think can be hit and miss. I've had really mixed success actually around kind of that as a tool, but it is a tool. And then obviously, I think with kind of all staff particularly, it was really lucky that we managed to have in-person away days as well as our numerous kind of online sessions, because I actually think, Katie, and you were there, the actual away day that we had in person, we got just a deeper, richer type of information than we did from subsequent webinars and online breakout rooms. That's obviously not me slating online consultation, but I think it just shows that hybrid working is here to stay. It's not either or, we've got to do both.
Yeah, great. Rita, Hayley, do you have any kind of, I guess, the takeaways, practical tools that you've used that really work in that stakeholder consultation?
One of the things that I've always found useful is if you look at the Sheila McKenney Foundation, and they have got a power analysis tool, and that tool, if you overlay your stakeholders onto that tool, it gives you a really good idea of who you should keep close and who you should stage at different levels of the consultation. So I think that's really good. And it also helps you to stay focused as well. And it's just a grid where you can just plot who's a very key stakeholder, who's less critical, who's essential, but maybe working with you in a slightly different way. It's a very simple tool, but really effective as well. And that's really good at that first stage while you're planning the whole process of how you're going to engage and who you're going to engage with.
Perfect, thank you. Hayley, anything from you? Or
yeah, and I think it's really interesting that Rita's just mentioned that, because as Rohati was speaking, I just wrote, think about how you can remove power dynamics, because that's really important, particularly for my organisation as a funder. So you're asking grantees essentially to give you feedback on your strategy. So that's a big deal, right? We're constantly as an organisation trying to think about how we continue to remove the power dynamic in our relationship. And that's back again to what my fellow panelists were saying earlier about where you keep funders in that, because again, there's a power dynamic there for you. So for us as GFC receiving funding, that's a power dynamic there too. So I think that's really important to consider. And I have to say, the way we approached our most recent strategy process, which was going to have to be mainly online, not least because of the pandemic, but because of where we're all based. And we actually thought really hard about who should be involved, because there's this automatic assumption that it's the executive team. But actually, we've got an incredible director of learning who is so good at bringing in different perspectives and ways of organising. So we invited her into the process. And I led it instead of the CEO, and he was actually removed and came in later in the process on purpose to ensure it wasn't being held and shaped just by him alone, which I thought was really smart. And of course, we all landed very in a similar place where he would have brought us to anyway, but it meant that there was other leadership opportunities. There's also opportunities for staff development in the organisation as well, and that's another thing as well that goes to trying to remove those power dynamics in the process, and to ensure that all feel like they have a voice. So another example is in the focus groups, there was no one from the executive team in those focus groups with staff, so that staff felt they could speak freely. We also did use SurveyMonkey for our partners, but it was anonymous. And our partners are quite used to that with us. So it's back to this, some tools aren't helpful in different circumstances, but our partners are used to communicating with us in that way. And we also use to what we said earlier, data we already had to help the process. And again, not have people feeling like they're answering the same question for us again, because we know, again, funder asking a grantee, they're going to do it because they feel like they have to. and we wanted to remove that from it as much as possible. So I'd say, yeah, Survey Monkeys, focus groups with staff, which were done online because we had to. And then actually the executive team came together in person in November last year to kind of consolidate all the information and talk a bit more tactfully about practical things that had to change in the organisation to help us reach the strategy that the whole organisation had agreed that we needed.
Brilliant, thank you, Hayley. Thinking, kind of moving on from the process itself and thinking a bit more about, you've gone through it, you've got a strategic direction that's coherent in terms of, the consultation you've gone through and the team putting it together. What does, a good strategy launch look like? So what do you actually do when you have it, something that you're really happy with and proud of? How do you get it out, both in terms of the external world, and also how do you get that buy-in from your team as well? Obviously Hayley Rohati feels like you're kind of living this at the moment, kind of going through that process. But maybe actually let's start with Rita, perhaps from a slightly more kind of objective perspective of someone who's perhaps not right in it at the moment.
Well, actually, I'm in it with a couple of organisations.
Okay, apologies.
So let me just take an example of one organisation. So one of the organisations involved with is going through a crisis moment at the moment. There's various options on the table about how it continues, if it continues, etc. And we know, and I'm kind of a couple of weeks into this role, I know already that when we go live, we are going to have to be very clear and very concise about what the strategy is and what it isn't, because that will be dependent on future funding, but also future relationships and the viability of the services that we produce. So our launch is going to be a trickle kind of event with one key message is on social media, trying to reach out to create a climate that says that change has happened in the organisation, and then a formal launch of a kind of a one-pager that says what the future is going to be. So first, we've got to actually lay the ground to say that a strategy is coming, to get people accustomed to the fact that this may be quite transformative.
So context is clearly important in terms of how you might do it. Rohati?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that in terms of, if the question is how do you successfully launch a new strategy, there's so many different ways to launch strategy. So it's really about an organization defining actually what would successful mean to you as you set sail in your next strategic period. And launching a strategy is fundamentally about communication. It's how you're communicating it to all of your, multiple kind of groups of stakeholders, internal and external. So things I would say are really important, and we're in the middle of this at Carers Trust, is being really clear on kind of what key messages you want to land for different audiences, and that therefore shapes the launch/communication activities. My chair and CEO are very much of the flavour that launching a strategy is a process. It's not an event. So it's like many events within that. Yeah. Obviously, it's nice to have kind of the nice kind of big bang launch, but I think kind of really meaningfully kind of, looking into kind of, well, what is it that you want everyone to feel as a result of this strategy? So for internal, stakeholders, which is, for Carers Trust, that's our staff and our network partners. A key outcome for us would be them feeling engaged and energized. Staff can see how their inputs have helped shape the final product. Individuals can see how their role and how their teams fit into successful delivery. And then staff also understand the metrics that are being used to monitor progress. How are we holding ourselves accountable? I've worked for so many organizations that develop a strategy and then kind of forget to actually say how they've actually gone towards meeting it. So, for our network organizations, understanding how we're going to measure our success is important. And also, they need to feel that their key interests are at the heart. So one of the things that that we did after developing the strategic framework was really uplifting kind of a higher kind of set of goals, which our CEO calls the galvanizing goals. And that's what we prioritize in terms of our messaging when we speak to network partners. And we leverage our existing infrastructure. So we use regional forums, we use the nation advisory boards, We're also going to use our annual conference coming up again to have a session there. And for Carers Trust, in launching this strategy, it's very much around network partners and staff feeling that, you know, they're owning it before it goes out into the outside world. We're also obviously engaging our key funders and supporters with it already too, and that's probably happening at the moment on a more bespoke basis, because we haven't yet kind of decided how we might kind of do kind of like a launch event. But yeah, one thing I'd say is what's meaningful for you as an organization, because everyone can go to an event, have a nice canapé and a glass of fizz and then leave and forget what it was actually about. So really think about what you want to land with everyone.
Thank you, Rohati. And we've got a question from the audience, which leads on really nicely, I think, from Stephen, which is, what can you do to ensure execution of the strategy lives up to the quality of the plan? Hayley, I'm going to come to you, just to perhaps start us off. But yes, a bit of
that's a good question.
It's really good.
So for us, the successful implementation of this wonderful document that's taken you ages to pull together, and at that point feels quite extractive to those who've been involved in it. For me, I think I know as a leader in our organisation that we've successfully implemented it if staff are referring to it. It's very similar to the way we approach safeguarding in our organisation. You know, it's a living and breathing way of being and keeping people safe, because people are talking about it. You know, there's a real fear that a strategy becomes like a policy, that it goes on the shelf. We all did it, it was amazing, we all bonded, had our canapes at the launch, and then bye-bye strategy. And we all go to the day-to-day, fighting fires, you know, serving the people that we, you know, that need our organisations. So for me, it's definitely staff contributing to the strategy and then referencing it in their work planning. Every year our staff set individual objectives. I always want to see those objectives referring to the strategy in some way. The way we operationalize it is we have an 18-month rolling plan. So we have this beautiful strategy, which we've also had a visual graphic designer draw a visual mapping of it this year, because so many of our, you know, our partners speak hundreds of languages all over the world. And we, again, this is about removing power dynamics. We've got this beautiful visual document that's coming together. And then we have staff contributed toward the 18-month operational plan, and they're updating it. So it lives, it was a virtual document for a while, and now we've closed it, and it's like, great, get cracking. And then we will review it every few months, and leadership will review it with individual staff, with departments. We have various, so, you know, development and communications, for example, will have one part, they'll hold one part of the plan, and that will feed into some of their guiding things that they need to do in that quarter. I think having a really trusting relationship amongst staff, so they feel really enabled, particularly junior staff who have a responsibility of something on that operational plan, to put their hand up and say, I haven't got to that yet. This emergency happened. So for our organisation, we have grantees in Ukraine. So everything went on hold for 2 months earlier this year, quite rightly, to meet the needs of our partners in Ukraine and surrounding countries. So nothing, you know, might have got done on the strategy in 2 months, and that's okay. And it's about, I think, not it being not this like wielding stick of, you must do this, otherwise you haven't met your objectives as a staff member. So I think for me, that's success. Like, if people successfully feel ownership of it, they are feeding it into their own work planning, their own objective setting for the year, because then they see their role in it, they see their individual purpose related to the strategy that they've been a part of creating, but then also knowing that it's okay if it shifts. And it's back to this flexibility I talked to about it right at the beginning. I also think it's, you know, it's working if you're talking about it at board meetings. I think the board play, obviously we all know this, the board play a key role in developing strategy. They certainly did in ours. And we want to be referring to it in board meetings, because otherwise what was the point in them being involved? And also you want them to help course correct you if they feel like you need it, or you to say to them, actually, the reason it's at this point is because of X, Y, and Z. And then they say, okay, well, maybe we need to edit or adapt this, because, you know, they've got shed loads of wisdom and strategic development between them as well. So it's finding those touch points for them to feed into it that feels really natural and authentic, I think is really important. But yeah, regular reference to it, I think, and you know it's being implemented. And if no one's talking about it for a little while, it might be a, well, you know, that document we all put together a while ago, you know, shall we talk about it? That would be what I would do.
Great advice there. Thank you, Hayley. Rita, anything from you in terms of the kind of successful execution of it once you have that great kind of document to live and breathe by?
Hayley's just said about making sure it's on the trustees' agenda. And I would actually say that it becomes a standing item, not at every meeting, because that's too much. And actually, you don't see that much distance travelled, usually in a strategy, between one meeting and the next, if you're meeting monthly. But I think maybe once a quarter, make sure there's a light touch review of the strategy, and that there's an opportunity to interrogate it as well, because that is the role of trustees. And I think, yeah, going back to being flexible around it as well. Nobody could have predicted COVID, but lots of people have now put in pandemics into their future planning. Lots of people are putting flooding into their future planning. We don't know what we don't know, but actually you can have the confidence that actually with a good strategy, you've got that flex available should you need it.
Yeah, perfect. And Rohati, I want to come to you, but ask you a slightly different question, because I know you're kind of responsible for impact. So thinking about how you measure success in terms of a new strategy and implementation of it, how do you ensure that success and impact is successfully captured and, probably more importantly, communicated, I guess, with the organisation, with, you know, just kind of stakeholders in general?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because actually I was going to talk about impact around one way to ensure execution of the strategy, the quality of the plan. So at Carers Trust, for the first time, we have a social impact plan, which is like a sister document to the strategic plan, which is essentially a list of metrics that we use for each pillar. We've got 4 strategic pillars that will give us that kind of visibility and transparency of whether or not we're getting closer to where we want to be. So all of these metrics come from the initiatives, the programs, the projects that all sit under, you know, the tactical actions that sit under the strategic pillar. And at a team level, different teams, different directorates will have ownership for a different cluster of metrics, and then the core ones, which we call the vitality metrics, they're the ones that will go to the board. So the board will see a handful of metrics under each strategic pillar, and that will basically give them a level of assurance from their governance perspectives that the execution of the strategy is living up to the intention and quality. And what I should say as well is when developing a social impact plan, it's part dream, part reality. So I think the reality is really understanding, particularly if you're a network organization, the capability of network partners to be able to actually help you collect those metrics, because we're a collective social impact model. So what we do is, you know, it's quite a huge exercise, which I'm working with our social impact team on, where we're reviewing all of the different sources of data that we collect, data from our network partners. Some of it is from, you know, annual, you know, network partner survey. Some of it is from programmatic data. And then others, we're going to have to develop new ways of collecting data, because we're putting in new ambitions and we haven't got the measurement for that yet. So it's I think once you've got the plan, you really need to think the strategic plan, you really need to think about the social impact plan next to it. And where we would like to aspire, Carers Trust, we'd like to have an element of that to be on our website as well. So key funders and supporters can see real time how we're getting on. But obviously not all of the data will be updated real time. Some will be because of the infrastructure and the mechanism we've got to collect that data, but others will be collected, you know, 6 monthly or even annually. But I would say, in answer to that question, the role of impact and ensuring quality of execution. That's where they come together in the social impact plan.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, and we're heading very quickly to the top of the hour. So I would love for each of you to perhaps just to wrap up by sharing your top kind of 1 or 2 tips or words of wisdom, bits of advice in terms of your experience of strategic planning with the audience. Would anyone like to volunteer to go first? As I know I've been picking on you all throughout.
I'll go first.
Thank you, Rohati. There we go.
No worries. So I'll just offer 2. I know there's loads, but that gives Rita and Hayley opportunity to put their bits. I'd say the first one, absolutely vital, is a good strategic plan has to have vision and long range thinking. Otherwise, as Rita said earlier, it's a business plan and a tactical project plan. It's got to take into account multiple stakeholder views, and it's also got to take into account the external operating environment. So yeah, make sure it's exciting. You want to persuade funders and supporters that as an organization you've got this, that you've got vision and you can deliver it. And also I'd say the other thing that was probably an important component is a solid impact measurement plan.
Yeah.
Don't skimp on that. That's really important.
Brilliant, thank you. Hayley.
So I will repeat a couple, I'm sure, but my top most important component is staff engagement, right from the beginning, even though it's much more timely than just sitting in your office writing it by yourself. And inspirational vision, so echoing a bit of Rohati there, it's no use to anyone if it stays on the shelf. So it needs to be inspiring, it needs to be that guiding star steering you all in a similar collective direction. And flexibility, you know, the world is changing, it's moving fast, and strategies have to be able to flex and pivot to move with it. And it's another way to demonstrate to staff how you need them to echo that flexibility if your strategy is able to do that as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Hayley. Rita.
I'd just say the first thing is just do it. Don't be kind of too distracted by, oh, have I got this in place, have I got to get this in place? Seize the day and just start the process of thinking about how you're going to bring it together. Don't overthink it. And I think, going back to what Rohati said as well, in addition to all of those core elements, your values, as an organisation, you know intuitively what you want to do and where you want to go and what values you hold dear. And let that strategy document speak up for those values. Let that be an articulation of your values, your future and your hopes.
Brilliant, thank you, Rita, and thank you all. A couple of kind of other key takeaways that I think that you know, kind of the Oaks team took away with, you know, the fact that having a strategy is important. You can get by without having one, but it does make it harder to pull together and have one kind of unified direction, and does open you up to vulnerability, as I think lots of organisations have found over the last couple of years. I think, Hayley, you talked a little bit about the kind of values and culture, putting that at the heart of the planning process, and by doing that, you know, you will hopefully very easily be able to identify who those important stakeholders are and the ones that you really need to talk to, and it not be a tokenistic process. And that, you know, in terms of strategy launch, both of Rohati and Rita, both of you talked about context being so important, that a launch, yeah, could be a lovely shiny event, but actually it needs to be much more nuanced than that, much more considered, and there's not going to be one size fits all in terms of a strategy launch for any single organisation. But just some really fantastic insight from all of you today. It's been, for me, a really thoroughly enjoyable conversation, and we've had some great comments and questions come through to the audience. So if I can thank the three of you massively for taking part in today's event, and Rohati particularly for giving up a bit of your holiday time to join us today, and a huge thank you to everyone who joined us in the audience, who I'm sure are struggling and a little bit uncomfortable and warm, and I hope you can now go and cool down somewhere nice. But huge thank you, and we hope to see you again at our next event. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Stay cool.